What is this thing called peace building? One of the things I learned at the University of Warwick in my classes on the theories and histories of human rights is the difference between concepts and conceptions. A concept is an idea which could have different conceptions. So, the particular way in which a concept is articulated by any person or group or ideology is a conception. The concept of peace building I intend to look at from an analytical comparative perspective, primarily against what I call the cognitive justice peace building perspective. It's a summary of my paper, which is divided into two main parts and 6 sections. The first part is about Golem optimism towards pluralism and dialogue. And the second part brings in the cognitive justice comparative perspective. The 6 sections give you a background, and then focusing on the Golem optimism itself, then cognitive justice and pluralism. Then we move on to cognitive justice and Golem optimism, the comparative bit. Then Golem in global peace building, and finally, a little critique, in my opinion, of the Golem approach to peace building. So, the concept of peace building became topical with the decline of the Cold War dichotomy. And I'm sure for those who have engaged a bit with peace studies will be aware that Johan Galtung is known as the father of peace studies. So with the decline of this bipolar conflict paradigm, internal conflicts within nation states came to the fore of discourse. And these were centered on identity dichotomies within the construct of the nation state, a construct that is highly problematized because of its descent from the empire worldview and from the Westphalian construct of the state, the nation state. Because in truth, you have many nations and subnational groups comprised within a state. And the quest for homogenizing identity is not a smooth ride. It often leads to conflict. So with mass atrocities, in law, mass atrocities is a term used to refer to four things: genocide, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Particularly with what happened in Rwanda and the Balkans, attention shifted to what to do with this. And different people theorized. Huntington talked about the clash of civilizations to explain the trajectory of conflict after the supposed triumph of capitalism over socialism. And so in 1992, Boutros Ghali, the then Secretary General of the UN, came up with the concept of peace building. And he defined his own conception of peace building, which has become the UN conception of peace building to date, as action to identify and support structures which will tend to strengthen and solidify peace in order to avoid a relapse into conflict. That, therefore, gives a limitation, a delimitation to this conception of peace building. And since then, the UN has stuck to this conception of peace building, which becomes increasingly narrow in the context of the advancements made in peace building studies. New conceptions of peace building have come up, and Hizmet, Golem optimism, is one such conception. If you go to the Peace Building Commission website, which was the Peace Building Commission was established in 2005, pursuant to several studies sponsored by the United Nations, the prominent one of which is the Brahimi report of 2000 and subsequent reports. You find there are only 6 countries on the Peace Building Commission's agenda. and they're all African. Burundi, Sierra Leone, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Central African Republic. So there has been a restrictive view, conception of peace building for the United Nations, except for what the new doctrine of responsibility to protect, which tended to broaden the spectrum of peace building by looking at human protection. First of all, the responsibility of states to protect their people, and where they fail, the responsibility of the international community. But even this norm has arguably been discredited. I argue in one of my papers that the recent way in which it was employed in Libya has lent it to discredit. Now, Golem optimism is a conception of peace building that is broader than the UN conception. And that is what makes it to have projects, action in many countries, 100 and over 100 countries. Why? Because it defines peace building as education. I'm using what is on the website: education, interfaith and intrafaith dialogue, advocacy, conflict resolution, and peace education, which can create trust and cooperation over ethnic, religious, and other divisions. I would argue that this broader conception of peace building makes more relevant, resonates more with the realities of conflicts that the world faces, beyond just the 6 countries of the UN Peace Building Commission. How is the Golem perspective, conception of peace building, optimistic, as described by Esposito and Yilmaz? It is optimistic precisely because it springs from a surrounding of pessimism. And so, borrowing from Professor Mohammed Abu Nima's analysis of approaches to conflict studies in Islam, I came up with 3 approaches to pluralism. And the core thing here is the reality of diversity, of pluralism. Well, it is a reality. The question is, what do we do with it? And so we have 3 approaches, in my opinion. Absolute intolerance of pluralism in Islam. Partial tolerance, which can be subdivided into pessimistic partial tolerance, and optimistic partial tolerance, and then tolerance of pluralism. In the first category, absolute intolerance, are those people who adopt interpretations of the Sunnah, the Hadith, the texts, that are absolutely exclusionary. And this pattern has been referred to several times today. And particular concepts within Islam that are used to promote this interpretation include jihad, dar al-harb, territory under war, according to some restrictive interpretations, the concept of the dhimmi, the second-class citizen, for them, the full Muslim, the full human is one who is a male, Muslim, believing, upright. The concept of ridda is apostasy under Islamic law. Those who hold on to the rigid interpretation that anyone who professes la ilaha illallah and recants and leaves a religion should be incarcerated, fed on bread and water for some days. If he doesn't repent, then he's killed. Narrow interpretations of that would incline one to categorize such into the absolute intolerant category. Those that adopt partial tolerance begin from the premise of the Medina Charter between Jews and those who believed in Medina. But then, the disposition of any person would make one either optimistic or pessimistic. Amongst the pessimistic group are those who would adopt exclusionary perspectives. The optimistic ones are those who realize that diversity, pluralism, is something that you cannot do without. You do away with. You just have to find a way of getting around it. And so I came up with 5 principles of the Golem optimism that makes it stand out from the others, which include recognition of the peculiarity of conflict and peace building for every era, And for the modern times, a distinction is made, contextualization. Then the core values are prioritized over the exclusionary tendencies, and tolerance emanates from this, and then leads to mutual understanding and dialogue, and an active engagement in preemptive, preventive, broadly conceived notion of peace building. Now, what is cognitive justice? It's a concept first used by Professor Shiv Viswanathan in 1997 to refer to the right for different knowledges to be treated equally. The right to equal treatment of difference. So long as an identity, a knowledge, a people are different, they have a right to be treated equally with any other, irrespective of the content of what their worldview might be. This concept was developed by other researchers like Professor Boaventura de Souza Santos. And I have identified 3 principles. First, recognition of diversity of identities. Second, intercultural translation. You encourage an interaction between different groups on the basis of mutuality. And finally, plurality of paths to problem solving. So no absolutist approaches that shut out options. Now, cognitive justice has an interesting history, which you will see in the paper for those who read it, from the colonial heritage of declaring entire peoples, their territories terra nullius, non-existent, we can just acquire, or anima nullius, they have no souls. There was a time when the perception in Europe was that non-European peoples did not have souls. So there's this incidence of conditional baptism. If you have a soul, then I baptize you. And the whole theorization generated and promoted by people like Darwin, the origin of species, and the descent of man, where he sort of entrenched this idea that mutual annihilation of peoples who are different is inevitable, sort of fed into the development of international law over the past few years. These are the kind of the conceptual assumptions that are challenged by the concept of cognitive justice. Now, between cognitive justice and Golem optimism, I've identified a few differences. First, Golem optimism is faith-based and inspired. Cognitive justice arises from the realities of diversities in the global south, the colonized world particularly, and how to redress the entrenched, systematized discrimination and subhumanization of these identities. Secondly, Golem optimism adopts what you call the soft approach, I would say, social capital. Cognitive justice, according to my propositions, tries to bring up institutional, systematic reforms that would entrench the recognition of equality and the reinvestment of humanity with dignity. And thirdly, pluralism, the approach to pluralism, Golem optimism adopts the language of tolerance, which for cognitive justice is a bit weak. Cognitive justice enthusiastically promotes the idea of recognition on equal basis. So, one is not at pains trying to recognize, but begins from the perspective that all are equal. And then Golem is obviously very broad, with tentacles across the world. Cognitive justice is a rising ideology, and it has inspired the idea of a plurinational state, a plurinational society, unlike the nation state. 2 states have passed constitutions in South America, the plurinational state of Bolivia and Ecuador, on the basis of recognition of these identities and diversity, and is a way forward. The differences, the similarities between Golem and cognitive justice, first, they have broader views of conceptions of peace building. Secondly, they promote dialogue for Golem, intercultural translation for cognitive justice, and their approach to pluralism, inclusivist for Golem and recognitory for cognitive justice. In the global context, Golem optimism is involved, in a contest for the soul of Islam. And the outcome of this contest will determine how much impact the Hizmet movement can make in global peace building. And I put this picture because the Hindu religion and the Buddhist religion are not amongst the people of the book in Islam. So it's easier to tolerate the Jews and the Christians than it is to do others. But promoting dialogue in this way, so that otherness, however radically different it might be, is recognized, is a very huge step forward. Now, there's the pessimistic negative signs around, yes. And these people may constitute a very small percentage of Islam, but their impact, the kind of volume, the way they occupy the space in a way that obscures the larger population of Muslims is something that cannot be underestimated. On the other hand, there are also optimistic signs around the world. An article written by Asani in 2003, So That You May Know Each Other, An American's Perspective to Pluralism, shows signs of progress. My critique of the Golem approach, my skepticism, are possible limitations that the Hizmet approach might have. First, it doesn't really articulate a political theory of how the state should be structured, what the law should be, what the constitution should be in reflecting pluralism. Secondly, I find it difficult to make out what the Hizmet attitude, a Muslim who is a Hizmet person, what his ideas would be about Ridda, apostasy, Dhimmi, the second-class person, and jizya, payment of tax, protection money because you are not a Muslim. Now, in the absence of direct Hizmet propositions of what the state should be, what the law should be, I think these are areas that Golem thinkers should look at. Someone like Abdullahi An-Naim, I don't know if he's a Hizmet person, but he has ideas, and he says certain things need to be reformed to come to terms with the modern times. So, finally, we have seen the rise of the concept of peace building and the different conceptions that have emerged. The Golem conception and how it is broader, the competing Muslim visions of pluralism, and how Golem stands out, a glimmer of hope. I've discovered Golem because of the word peace building, which is the core of my research. I come from a country where there are diverse identities, 250, more than 250. And how do you manage this? So Golem is like a light, a blast from the blues for me. We've seen how it compares with cognitive justice. We've seen the global impact. But I still argue that if Hizmet worldview of Islam can be spread, maybe have 1 billion more people in the world, it will have very huge impact. And we've seen the possible limitations. Thank you.